Good evening. Welcome again to Biblical Insights with Bob. It's good to have you back with us. Tonight we're looking at a passage from the Gospel of Luke, and we're going to start by reading that first. So this comes from Luke chapter 10, 38 to 42, a short scripture tonight, but I think a good lesson. So starting at verse 38. Now they were traveling along. He entered a village, and a woman named Martha welcomed him into their home. She had a sister whose name was Mary, who was seated at the Lord's feet. But Martha was distracted with all her preparations, and she came up to him and said, "Lord, do you not care that my sister has left me to do all the serving alone? Then tell her to help me." But the Lord answered and said to her, "Martha, Martha, you are worried and bothered about so many things, but only one thing is necessary. For Mary has chosen the good part, and shall not be taken away from her." As we enter another year, and with all that's going on around us in our culture, in our country, politically, it's very easy to get caught up in a lot of things. Reminds me of a story once I heard about a farmer. He got up in the morning early enough to go milk the cows. Of course, that's one of the first things you have to do. But when he was on the way to the barn to milk the cows, he heard the pigs making lots of noise over in their pig pen, and he remembered that he had to feed the pigs. So he went over to feed the pigs. While he was feeding the pigs, he noticed the hens sitting on their nest and a couple of eggs there. He said, "Oh yes, I got to go gather the eggs." So he went to gather the eggs, and he kept doing this until finally he realized that it was 10 o'clock in the morning, and he hadn't gotten around to milking the cows yet, and that's got to be the first thing you do in the morning. So that's kind of what we are today. Do you ever feel like that's what we're facing today? So Luke tells this story about Jesus visiting Mary and Martha. Maybe it'll teach us something about priorities as we look ahead at the beginning of this new year. So let's look at the words of Jesus here. Number one, he said to Martha, "You are worried and troubled, or worried and bothered about so many things." Now, this wasn't a criticism of Martha's activities or comparing Mary to her and say Mary's better. It wasn't anything like that. He was just commenting that she was caught up in so much activity. You're troubled or anxious by the outward activity. Now, I don't need to ask you, don't we get anxious and troubled by everything we see on the news? I've talked to a lot of people who quit watching the news because it troubles them so much. So she was bothered and troubled about so many things. Doesn't that describe our culture today? A lot of times the urgent things in life just kind of squeeze out the important things. Even the telephone is an instrument of urgency. Someone said the bathtub was invented in 1850 and the telephone wasn't invented for 1875. That meant there was 25 years there. You could sit in the bathtub and not worry about the phone ringing. But now we have that problem today. We have emergency responders today. My father-in-law was a fireman. And you know what? He spent most of his time in the fire station waiting for something to happen. And so those firemen would do all kinds of stuff to just keep busy while they were waiting for an emergency. We have policemen, helping professions, and they're there waiting for an emergency to happen. It's got to be a nerve-wracking occupation as an emergency responder, don't you think? Sometimes, deadlines create a sense of urgency, a sense of trouble. And all these things bother us. They make us anxious. They affect our health. Today's society seems to be urgency-driven. That's why we wear wristwatches, because we have to keep time. There's always some appointment we have to keep, something that's urgent that we do. And now we have smartphones and text messages and all this other stuff. So we live in an urgent society, and that takes its toll on us. Blood pressure, heart attacks. When we're urgency-driven, we tend to do trivial things when we're not facing a crisis, like the firemen that play games. And so Jesus said to Martha, 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 you're troubled and bothered about so many things. I think he was just speaking to that. He wasn't criticizing. He was just speaking to him. I wonder what he would say to us today. Bob, you're so troubled and bothered by so many things. Would he say that to you? Really, when it comes down to it, only a few things are necessary. Not very much in our lives is really urgent, really vital. In fact, one of the things Jesus is saying here is the most important things in life are, a lot of times, they aren't urgent. I've come to believe there are 4 kinds of activity. First is urgent and important. I remember one time I had just come home from some trip or some place I'd been, and I was standing in the dining room talking to my wife, and I heard brakes squeal and a crash, and I knew that my son was out in front on his bicycle. That was urgent. That was important. We dropped everything and went out in front and took care of what was urgent. So some things are urgent and important. And there's some things that are important that are not urgent. How about this? Studying for a test at school. Important. Yet we seem to tend to put those things off. Sermon preparation for a pastor. You name yours. There's always something in your life that you say, I got to do. I'll get to it later. It's important, yes, but not now. And then there's those things that are urgent and not important. How about when your phone rings? You don't know what it is. And today, half the time your phone rings, it's somebody trying to sell you something. You don't even want to answer it. But you don't know. It's urgent, but not important. And then we've got those things that are not urgent or not important. TV, trivia, playing solitaire on your computer or your phone, your smartphone, going to YouTube, going to Facebook, or answering your email. Isn't it surprising how much we do that fits in this category? What are the few things that are important and urgent in the final analysis? I went to a church service a week ago and listened to an evangelist talk about this very thing. And he kind of came down to the point where he said, name the 5 things in your life that really mean the most to you. And in the process, he picked up his iPad that he was using for his notes, and he showed pictures of his family and said, these are what's most important to me. You know, when it comes right down to it, there's only just a few things that are really vitally important. And you know what? As I've come into retirement and reached the age I am, I'm realizing more and more that the most important things in life are relationships, family, friends, church groups, but the most vitally important, the most solidly important is my relationship with Jesus Christ and with God. And so Jesus said in verse 42, but only one thing is necessary, and Mary has chosen the good part, and that shall not be taken away from her. Really only one. He's saying that there's a priority in life that stands out above all the rest. Is it family, job, church? I hope it's God. I remember Dr. Leslie Parrott was president of Olivet Nazarene University, and I heard him make the statement that all of our lives can finally be summed up with one statement. For example, Abraham Lincoln freed the slaves. George Washington, the father of our country. What will be said about us? Mary has chosen the better part. Now what did Mary choose? She chose to sit at the feet of Jesus. Discipleship, listening to the words of the Master. Folks, that wasn't just 2,000 years ago in that village. It's today. Finding our priorities. It has to be exactly that. In the Gospel of Matthew 6:33, Jesus said, seek ye first the kingdom of God and his righteousness, and all these other things will be added to you. I used to do a illustration using a jar and some rocks and some other things, and what I would do is I would fill that jar with fairly large rocks, representing the important things in our life. And you get to the point and you look at that jar and you'd say, that's full, I can't get any more in it. But then I would take some pebbles, real tiny stones, and I would dump them in over those big rocks, and they'd fill up all the cracks. Those represent probably the minor things in life, the minor relationship, the jobs, the things we have to do, but really in the final analysis aren't vitally important. And then you say, well, now it's really full. But then I could take a jar of sand and dump that in where there's rocks and pebbles, and it would fill it up. And then you say, now it's really full. And those kernels of sand, those grains of sand, represent all this other stuff that we're faced with in life. And then you say it's really full, and I could take a jar of water, and it would fill up everything else. Life is like that. But you know what? If I would wait and put in those big rocks at the very end, they wouldn't fit. We have to put first things first, and the biggest rock on the bottom, the most important thing in life, is what Mary found sitting at the feet of Jesus, serving him, worshiping him, reading his word, studying him, listening to him. I believe we need to consider that in today's world. What's really important. Spend the time and the energy and the effort where it really counts. Not a bad thing to think about as we come into the second month of this new year, is it? I hope that this has got you thinking a little bit about what's really important in life.